One of the projects I've been working on is that Mobile Dimension Sawmill. Was working on the engine of that. I got it pretty well back together, and then the starter wasn't working right. So I pulled the starter off and pulled it apart. It was pretty grungy in there and everything, and I decided I was going to get a new starter for it. Well, I did order a new starter for it, but it didn't fit, and it's kind of hard to figure out what starter it does take. But as I got to looking at this old starter, it was mostly just grungy. It had some rust and some corrosion in it in places, but mostly it was just sawdust and crap in it. So I decided I'd go ahead and clean that up. I took the housing, the fields, and cleaned those up the other day and got some of the other stuff cleaned up. I'm going to sandblast the end caps and powder coat them. But this is the armature. It's not really in bad shape. The ends of it here, the shafts, are a little bit dirty. I thought I'd see if I couldn't polish those up a little bit. The commutator here on here is not really very bad at all. It's you can't even hardly feel any wear on it. It's a little bit dirty, so I'm not going to turn it down, but I thought what I'd do is just take the file and touch it up. That's something you don't want to use emery cloth or sandpaper or something on, because those particles get embedded in the copper on there, and then it can create a mess. It causes the brushes to wear out faster, but it can also cause arcing and stuff. So anyway, I'm just going to take a file on that and just polish that up a little bit. Just lightly go over it and polish it up. There was a little bit of a ridge on this outside edge and a little lower here in the middle. There's some scratches in it. Let's see if we can't. It's pretty much polished up already. That's a lot better than it was. And I don't need to clean out between these sections on there. Normally you'd take something and clean those out, knock those down, that insulation between each one of these sections on there, but I don't need to do that because I didn't take that down at all. Now I'm going to change this over and try to get in there and clean up that bearing surface, that shaft where that bearing rides in there. Alrighty, that looks a lot better than it did. I got this shaft polished up. It's got a few little pits in it and stuff, but it's polished up so that Bendix will slide back and forth on it, and it should run in the bearing pretty good. So I took the armature up to the basement and put it on the lathe, polished up these shafts here where everything slides on, particularly here on where it goes through the bearings on both ends. Then I just took a file and went over the commutator and smoothed it out. It didn't need to be turned down. It was already pretty good. It was just a little dirty and stuff. So I just took the file and filed it down. I didn't need to do anything in here with these segments to clean those out because they're down far enough now as it is. They don't need to be cleaned out. All I did was polish that up a little bit and clean up the rest of this around here. Clean the rust and stuff off of it. Cleaned all the crud out of it. I did the same thing with this. I was going to take these out and powder coat the whole thing, but I couldn't find the right driver for my impact driver for these screws, and I decided to heck with it. I didn't really need to do that anyway. I'd painted it before with exo rust, and the starting fluid I used to clean this up with just ate that right off of there. I don't know why that did that, but it usually doesn't do that. But everything else cleaned up. The brushes are all in good shape. Everything is actually in pretty good shape in there, so that's not too bad. This end bell here was pretty pitted, pretty rusty on the inside. So, and then the outside here, I sandblasted that, cleaned it up, and powder coated it. And the same with the cap here on the end. This is an aluminum casting. It wasn't too bad. It was a little bit of corrosion on it, a lot of dirt in it and stuff, but I sandblasted it out, powder coated it. I did it in red because that is the color that happened to be in the gun that was handiest, and I didn't want to screw with it, so I just used what was there and powder coated those red. Like I said, I wished I'd have been able to do this, and of course the solenoid, you can't really do anything with that without taking it apart too, and I don't really want to do that. So everything else, this plate here for the brushes. The pad for it was pretty rusty, had some corrosion on it. I cleaned it up with the wire brushes, did a little handwork on it. It looks a lot better, should be good for another 100,000 miles. This is the only sticking point here, is the Bendix, and it's stiff turning it around. It got a dent in it here on the end of it right here that may cause it to drag a little bit, I don't know, but it's stiff. It was full of grungy old dirty grease. I flushed it with starting fluid and turned it quite a bit and wiped it down, and I finally just took it in and stuck it in the ultrasonic cleaner for a while and soaked it and got it pretty well cleaned up. Anyway, it still works. The purpose of the Bendix, of course, is this goes in, engages in with the starting gear, and then when the engine starts, it turns this backwards, or this freewheels on here, and it forces the Bendix go back on the shaft. Let's see if I can force some grease or oil down in there to lubricate that up inside a little bit, but I got to let the solvent dry out first that's in there. So all the other parts are all in pretty good shape. So the only problem is trying to figure out the puzzle of how to put that back together. It's been 45 years since I've done one of these, maybe longer. Anyway, it doesn't just go right back together. I can kind of figure it out. Unfortunately, the VolksWagon book doesn't go any farther than how to change the solenoid on one of these. It doesn't really show you the starting motor taken apart. But I'm an old collector, hoarder, and I happen to have some of these old motor manuals and stuff, and they are pretty good about that kind of stuff. I got 99, there we go, open that up, and that tells you all kinds of things on how to repair this stuff, even take the solenoid apart and the switches. Let's see, starting switches. Here's the starting motor. Got diagrams in there of everything, different styles of starting motors. Oh yeah, here they show how to lubricate the sprag clutch there. Anyhow, I've got a good indication on how to go about fixing that and putting it back together. Plus I've got the video that I took when I took it apart, which I didn't really take it to use as a reference to put it back together, but I can still use it. But I pretty much got it figured out. So it's pretty straightforward. It's not too big of a deal. We'll get it figured out. Right now, I just took this out of the solvent tank, so I'm going to let it drain and then try to get some oil in there on that clutch. There's a start at putting this together. I got the brush plate on, the brushes on, the armature put in, and the end cap on. I lubed that bearing up a little bit, shaft up a little bit when I put it together so it spins pretty freely. So that much is together. At least now I think I know what I'm doing. Of course, that's usually when you run into trouble. But we got that starter all together. I'm going to bring a battery over here, or the battery charger over here or something, and try it out and make sure it works before I go any farther on it. But it should work pretty good, I think. So I got to figure out which one of these. I think this one is the one that the power comes off of to go to the starter to power the starter, but I'll have to go look and see one of these two. Anyhow, she's back together, and we'll do a test fire on it here. The starter is all back together. Now, because I've got everything all painted up in here and parts powder coated and everything, I think that was what part of the problem was with the starter, was not getting a good ground contact. So I got a ground wire here made up that I run between the bolts that go into the solenoid and into the starter case, and I'll make up another ground strap that'll go from the starter case to the ground, to the battery ground. It'll probably go to the engine ground, where I've got the battery ground going to the engine, and then that way we'll make sure and have a good ground on that. So everything's all set up. I got a battery out, got jumper cables hooked up to it, get the jumper cables hooked up to the ground lead that I made on there and to the starter solenoid input. I got a little jumper cable here. I'll hook up here to the solenoid switch, to the activator, and we'll see what happens. Okay, that's working. And it's pushing the Bendix in. The solenoid is pushing the... It's releasing and coming back out. Uh-oh. The little wire is pretty light here. It's getting hot, so... No, it's not working. Okay, that's not good. You gotta get a heavier wire. This one's getting pretty hot. I guess I could use a screwdriver like we used to do in the old days. Maybe. May just need to break those brushes in a little bit. They change those and put everything back on. Okay, it's working better now. See, I said that, it don't work anymore. Well, I wished I'd been able to get that solenoid apart to clean the contacts on that. That's maybe what the problem is. There's a solenoid contacts, not because it may not be getting power to the starter. Yeah, so I touch this to the starter. So I may need a new solenoid for that. That's probably what it is. The contacts probably got corroded on that solenoid. But we're going to use it the way it is. Put that back on the motor on the engine there and see what we can do. Motor spins good. And the Bendix is kicking in and out, so I think the problem is the contacts in the solenoid. Maybe I'll see if I can order a new solenoid and change that one, but meantime I'm just going to go ahead and put it together the way it is and deal with what we got. I got this starter mounted back up in there, and as I showed earlier, I made a ground strap that ran from the solenoid attachment bolt here back to the main bolt that holds the starter together, the starter motor together. And then I got some more of that stuff and I run another one, and this one goes down and attaches into the crankcase where this battery cable attaches here. Let's see here. So here's the battery cable that goes down and attaches to the main crankcase right down here. And I just run that ground cable over to it just to make sure I get a good ground, because everything's all painted up, and that's one of the things that happens on almost everything that I've ever seen is if the ground gets corrosion and stuff, then pretty soon you can't, you're not getting a good connection, and you wind up pulling more current than you should. I had to do just a little bit of rewiring here. There's some wires that pulled out and stuff on this when I was fooling around with it when I thought the switch was bad. I've got a regular toggle switch that I'm going to put in, and then a momentary on switch that I'm going to put in for a starter switch instead of this keyed switch. Now the original keyed switch was a good quality switch, but I lost the key to it. So I bought this other one here. It was inexpensive and it's cheap. I thought it was bad before, and it turned out it was the starter that was bad, and the solenoid is still not great. But anyway, I'm going to head and keep this in here for now, because I need to put the momentary on switch on here and the toggle switch. I'm going to need to do a little modification here to this, put a plate out here so that I can mount that up to it. Anyway, we'll give her a crank here now and see what happens. Okay, I've got oil pressure and it started, and I tried this before. I cranked it a bunch before and it didn't start, so it had gas in the carburetor and in the line. So I'm going to go get some gas now, put some more gas in it and see if I can get it running some more. Well, I got a can of gas, run the hose down through it, and I've got a primer bulb in here to pull the gas up to get it running in the line. Let's see here. Got to get this fuel line back away from that exhaust. I let it idle for a little while, pumping out a lot of smoke. and then there was oil pumping coming out of the exhaust, the mufflers here on top of that manifold on both sides. So it made a lot of smoke for a while, but I run it long enough now. For now, I don't have the baffles on there for the cooling on it yet, so I need to put those on there to make sure that you get the airflow over the cylinders and the cylinders stay cool. But it's looking good. It's starts good. Smoke has quit on it now. Got a good oil pressure. The smoke's quit on it now. I was hoping that that's what it was that residual oil in the cylinders and not stuck rings or anything. It's been sitting for a long time. The guy that had it, that I bought it from, had filled up the crankcase completely full of oil and filled up the cylinders full of oil. And I'd pulled the spark plugs and drained some of the oil out of it, but you can't get all of the oil out of the top end of it when you do that. So it looks like it's quit smoking for the time being, so hopefully that did it. All right, I get those, let that cool off now so I don't burn myself again, and put those baffles on there. I have to figure out what I'm going to do with that air filter. I might have to modify this a little bit so that you can get that breather vent in there or something, but and I'll have to put a clamp. I'll probably make some saw marks in that so I can put a clamp on it to get it clamped down tight on there. But otherwise, I'm happy. That thing's working pretty good, I think. Yeah, cool. I'm spending a little bit too much time working on this motor, but I want to get it going so that I can get that sawmill operating. I've got some big logs that need to be cut up into 2x material for working on the house. And if the logs are too big to use on the band sawmill, so I want to get this sawmill going and learn how to use it. So I've got the engine running, but I'm not sure the governor is working right. So I got downloaded, or actually just photocopied the manual on the governor, so I'll work on getting it set up. And I went and dug out some of my tools. I don't remember how to use all this stuff anymore, but I got my engine analyzer so I can figure out the RPM, adjust the carburetor and stuff, and I've got a timing light so I can set the timing on there. I did statically set the timing, but I need to set it and get it accurate. Meanwhile, I was going to work on this air filter here. This is the air filter bracket that it come with, and the Napa here couldn't find me an air filter that would fit on it, so they wound up getting me this one here, which I kind of like this one, but it's about twice as big as it needs to be, but this will work okay. It'll actually work good, but it doesn't have an inlet in it for the crankcase ventilation. So I was going to work on this one and see if I could modify it. This is a new air filter for the Mighty Mite sawmill for the Kohler engine on that. Well, I've got it and I put it on there and it'll work. It'll fit on the bracket, but the stud here that goes through to hold it down is too short to come through the piece on the top there. So what I was going to do, I was going to go make a nut that would fit down through here and screw into that and just make a nut for that to fit. Well, I took that up to the shop and got to looking at it, and I thought this was a 1/4 inch bolt. It's not an SAE bolt, it's a metric bolt. Well, I got to looking through my metric stuff and checking it out, and it turns out the thread on there, that's an M7, 7mm, and it's a 125 pitch thread, and I don't have a tap for a 125, and that's pretty uncommon. There's not a whole lot of 7mm 125 taps. I had to order one from China, so who knows what it did. One of the problems of this was solid on the bottom down here, and it fit over the throat of the carburetor, or the neck inlet of the carburetor, but it was loose on there. It wouldn't tighten up. So what I did is I took the saw and made a whole bunch of cuts around it so that it would kind of collapse in, and I've got a hose clamp on there that I can stick on and tighten that up, and that worked pretty good. Now I thought this was the filter element here, but this is not. This is a hard plastic shield. The air goes through here and it's got a paper filter element inside of it. So I think what I'm going to do is drill out one of these inlets here a little bit so that this vent line for the crankcase ventilation will fit up in there. And then it'll be all good to go for that. And one of the things that I was worrying about is these spark plug leads. They were kind of coming in, getting close to this exhaust. So I put a couple of 8L clamps. I got a big one around this tube here, the intake tube, and clamped that over so that it would stay away from the heat on these exhaust pipes and the muffler. So I'll do that on the other side. Then I'll work on this governor and getting the tune-up on this, getting the timing set and getting the carburetor adjusted and getting the governor set up. Hi you, hi you.
Hey Squeaky. Hey, oh yeah, that's your Squeaky. Hey Squeaky. All right, Squeaky.
Time getting the governor adjusted on that thing to get it to do more than idle. Well, I got the cheat sheet out here out of the book to adjust the governor, and I was going through all that, and it just wasn't making sense, and it wasn't doing what it was supposed to do. It wasn't working. I couldn't get it to idle. I couldn't get it to run up. If I adjusted the way they wanted to, it would have oversped. So I went online and I started looking, trying to figure it out, thinking maybe there was something wrong with the governor. I found a Facebook page on these mobile dimension sawmills, and going down through that, somebody had asked a question about the governor, and a guy had posted on there this sheet here on how to adjust it, and it's just the opposite of what this sheet says on the idle adjustment. This one says to loosen the lock bolt A, which is back here on the governor on the handle, the throttle adjustment on there. Which this one says, and then this one says to place the engine throttle lever, which is this lever back here, as far to the right as it can go so it goes into the idle position. And this one here says to place the throttle lever as far to the left as it will go into full throttle position. Anyway, using this that I got off a line there that somebody posted on Facebook, I got it right for the idle adjustment. Now I have to go through and do all of the stuff for the running adjustment of it, but that's a load off my mind anyway. Well, then I've got my engine analyzer out, and I haven't used it for years. And the last time I had it out, I loaned it to somebody else, and they lost the instructions for it. So I was going to hook it up, but it had been so long since I used it that I forgot how to do it. So that was the other thing I did. I went in and found Sears online, and they've got the manual for it, the operating manual for it online. I downloaded that. So now I can hook this up on the engine and get everything adjusted. I also found my timing light. I haven't used it for years either, so I've got the timing light out. And so now I can go through and set up the timing and everything on the engine and get it up and tuned up properly, hopefully. So anyway, things are looking up. It wasn't looking up very good there for a while when I couldn't get that governor adjusted, but things are better now.
I think I'm pretty much done fooling around with this engine. Finally figured out the governor last night. I looked up online and found a page, showed how to adjust it. It was just the opposite of what the page in the book was. So I got it set up pretty good. I went through all of that today. I hooked up my engine analyzer to it and set the RPM up, and then put a timing light on it and adjusted the timing. I'd statically set the timing for top dead center when I put everything together, and that's exactly where it was at with the timing light. I had to adjust it a little bit. It's supposed to be 14 degrees. And then I checked to see the advance on it. And so when you run the RPM on it up, the advance goes just the way it's supposed to, so that's working good. The governor set up. So the RPM comes up on it. You're supposed to set it up for the RPM at 2200 with the throttle here vertical. My RPM, my tachometer only goes up to 2000, so I can't really do any more than that. I was having trouble getting it to idle down to come down. Well, I did two things on that. I found a spring and I put in on the throttle for a throttle return spring to help pull that back. Then I found out this arm here was also coming up against the case on the governor there and interfering with that. So I'm keeping it from going all the way over. So I straightened that arm out a little bit and did a couple more adjustments on it, and everything looks good now. So I think I'm done with the engine now. That everything's performing the way it's supposed to on that. Now what I need to do is dig out the carriage for it that it sits on, and with the blades and everything, and go through that. I got all new belts for the machine, so I got to get the carriage out, the saw head itself out, go through that and make sure all the bearings and everything are working on it right. It's been buried back in the hangar behind us, a bunch of stuff, so now the next thing I've got to do is dig it out. But first I'm going to swamp the hangar out so that I can get the truck in there and work on the tie rods and stuff on it. I'll put all this stuff away and slide that engine over there out of the way again, and it'll sit here for a while. But that's good. That's finally running like it's supposed to. Make sure and pull the kill switch out. Good. That's good. Good. I adjusted that up a little bit more. I can't really do anything except kind of guess because my tachometer only goes to 2000. I was running it up past that for the center. That's where the middle of this throttle control is supposed to be, is to run it up to 2000, and then to 2500 at full throttle. Obviously I can't do that. Again, put everything away now and go do something else.